Hey everyone, this is Rocky from WheelerandChess.com, back with another video and another installment in the Punishing Early Queen Activity series. I like this one. I don't know how other people feel about it, but I'm always curious to look at stuff like this. So I actually just played a game against a guy. I think this is reversed here. I had the black pieces and I got totally crushed. I actually was playing very well, but my opponent was playing actually perfectly, 0.00 center pawn loss, so it's kind of hard to compete with that. And, you know, when that happens, like, hey, sometimes they just had a great game, but you do kind of check out their profile, and, okay, it's a relatively new account. He's a premium member, so, I don't know. Thought maybe maybe he's just good. But then I looked at his stats, and, like, his blitz rating was, like, low, and then bam, all of a sudden, he's winning all of his games. Like, he's just winning, like, 10, 20 games in a row, and, like, I looked at some of them, and they're, like, all perfect games, so, yeah, low ratings and every other time control. So, okay, you can draw your own conclusion to that. I already have my own. But as I was looking through his games, I came across one where he got this. His opponent played the McConnell defense against him. So this opening that we've looked at in some of my previous videos, I was like, hey, I've got to see how we crush the McConnell defense, because surely he's going to do it perfectly. And I ran a computer analysis on this game, which you can do now in chess.com. And yeah, he did play perfectly and crush him in 14 moves. So we'll check out how he did it. Okay, so after black plays queen f6 on move 2, you have a couple options. You can play bishop c4, which is a great move. You could play knight c3. Probably you could even play d4. I forget how that works. But yeah, I've been playing bishop c4 just because it feels like so natural, and it is very good. But I kind of like this knight c3 move because I feel like it forces black's hand a little bit more, and I think it's the variations that you get they just look like very good for white. I mean, it's going to be good for white anyway, but I think black's more likely to make a mistake, which we see in this game, and also even if he doesn't, it seems like easier to just get into the winning position a little bit quicker. So I might start switching to knight c3 instead of bishop c4 here on move 3 for white. So the problem here, obviously, is that, okay, white is threatening on the next move to play knight d5, which would hit the queen and would also fork the c7 square. And if nothing else were to change in the position, or nothing significant that would change this factor, then black would have to drop the queen back to d8 to defend c7. And yeah, if you're the kind of person who plays queen f6 on move 2, you don't want to play queen d8 on move 3. So most likely black's going to do something to either prevent knight d5 or make it so that the queen doesn't have to drop back there. So one of the computer suggestions, not the top suggestion if you let it run for a little while, but it's actually bishop d6. And I've seen this before. The idea is that you allow knight d5, but now you don't have to go back to d8 because the bishop's got this square. So you, like, for example, could go here and keep an eye on this square, which is a little bit annoying for white because white wants to develop this bishop at some point somewhere. That would actually leave the pawn hanging, or actually, you know, well, maybe if you developed here, then actually it wouldn't quite be a fork. And that's what happens in this old Morphy game is, yeah, also it's looking here. And actually, I think in my very first video, or in a video I did a long time ago, I looked at some of these variations where you can actually, there's all sorts of cool tactics in these variations where you can give up this pawn, you can give up this pawn. I mean, and everything just works out in white's favor, and there's some awesome tactics. So I'll have to look at those again before I discuss those in depth. But that's the idea behind bishop d6, is that it allows some really sharp stuff. Now, unfortunately for black, none of it really seems to work out in his favor. The other idea is that black wants to play c6, boot the knight, probably drop the bishop back, and then maybe expand in the center with d5. So that's it's kind of slow, though. That's the problem. And black's kind of locked himself into it, because what else are you going to do with this bishop if you don't do that? But okay, that's the idea behind bishop d6. And we can look at some of the sharp variations in another video, but yeah, I mean, you could also play knight a6 with the idea of watching the c7 square, but I mean, at the very least, white can take, I don't know if this is the best move, but if you look at something like this, and okay, white still can play knight d5, he's gonna castle, he's better developed. This pawn is also kind of weak, so like if he plays knight d5 and the queen has to maybe drop back, or well, probably actually the queen would have to go like d6, and the queen would have to watch both of these squares, sorry. Because they'd both be under attack. it just seems really, really awkward, and the queen's got to bounce around, and white's getting developed. So even though black has the bishops here, he's got a damaged pawn structure, he's still got backwards development. The queen's going to be blocking his center pawn, which is going to make his development even more awkward. We saw that in some previous videos in this continental defense, where a lot of times pieces are getting in the way of each other because they're on, I don't want to say the wrong squares, but they're on squares where they kind of impede sort of a natural flow, piece flow. So that's probably not a great option. The computer actually likes d6, which is kind of funny because it allows knight d5 and forces the queen back to d8. But the computer's idea here is at least that it's kind of like, I think, to cut your losses and minimize damage. And you'll see that sometimes where if you see like kind of a dubious opening, or maybe somebody makes a mistake early on and you look at the computer analysis later, I've noticed that the computer a lot of times will like just kind of bite the bullet and try to like put the pieces back on the squares where they should have been to start with. And yeah, like, okay, you lose time and the position's going to be worse for you because of that loss of time in most cases, but at least it's not quite as terrible. So, I mean, in this variation, you might get something like, okay, well, thematically, white would probably want to open up because he's got better development. He wants to open lines towards the king. And at least now, like, black could play c6, and okay, then I could go to a few squares. When I looked at the computer, I think it recommended knight e3, and my thought here is that you're bringing more pieces over to the king side, where probably black's going to eventually castle. And also, you've got two pieces looking at f5, two knights potentially looking at knight f5, which is interesting because you've seen, like, in some Roy Lopez games, like, this isn't a Roy, but I mean, like, in some of those games, eventually, or an Italian game, you'll see white try to get, like, a knight over to h4 and then over to h5, which can be a really nice square for the knight and quite annoying, especially if black has played h6, because then it's hard for him to really kick the knight out. Because if he were to kick it out here, then the h6 pawn would be hanging to do this knight. But the problem is with this maneuver here is that a lot of times, you know, if black hasn't put the bishop on b7, he can snap that knight off. And, you know, even the double f pawn here for white isn't necessarily terrible because you can organize some attacks that way sometimes. But the point is that here you've already got a knight looking at f5. So if you can imagine that in the game, at some point, if you played this maneuver and he were to take it off, then, you know, you would just bring your other knight back over and you would still have a knight on this awesome square. So it's not something that would happen right away. I'm just saying that that's another benefit of the knight being on e3. Of course, it also looks at the d5 square, and you know, potentially could even go to c4 at some points. It depends on what's going on. But yeah, this is a good square for the knight. It's the bottom line. And then, you know, if black were to take this, for example, because I think that's what the computer was recommending when I looked at it before, you get a position like this where, okay, black isn't getting killed immediately, but white's got better development. He's got the option of kind of castling long or short. He's only got to develop one piece either way. The queen is looking at this square for the moment, so black's going to have to do something about it. It's not the end of the world, but the queen is just really nicely centralized. You can imagine if, you know, white might be able to get some pressure on this backwards d pawn, and it's going to be hard for black to just liquidate that pawn because he's going to open up lines when white's got the better development, and that should favor white. He's got more pieces to do things with. So this is just like not a great position for white or for black, but you know, again, it's kind of like, I think, the computer cutting its losses and just trying to do damage control. So that's the reason, that's the recommendation behind d6, is just to also protect this pawn, obviously, because, you know, after the knight d5 and the queen drops back, then, you know, you don't want this knight just snapping this pawn. So that's the idea there. But I don't think most people will play it because, again, you're talking about humans, not computers. So the computer was trying to do damage control to undo what the human player did, but you're not playing the computer doing damage control. You're playing the person who chose to put the queen on f6 to begin with. So I really don't think you're going to see many people play d6 here. I have seen bishop d6 with that first idea. But most likely you're going to see c6, which is kind of the natural way to keep the knight out of here. Unfortunately, this is like already really bad for black because of d4, which is played in the game, of course. And this open line's a little bit too quickly. And okay, we can't look at every variation, but we'll just look at the one in the game here. So takes, and this allows the bishop maneuver out here, which I've seen before. Okay, now the queen's got to go, you know, somewhere awkward. I mean, if he goes to g5, for example, to look at this pawn with maybe with check, because this looks like this knight's got to move, but you got to remember that this pawn can be taken two ways, so the knight actually isn't going to have to move. So, you know, there's different things. I mean, black here just wanted to, I guess, keep a little bit more eye in the center. He's still going to lose the pawn back, but yeah, I mean, this looks terrible. I mean, you've got ideas of e5. You can just take. Apparently, taking is more accurate for a reason I'm not totally sure about, but of course, our friend here played the most accurate move. And okay, here I was kind of asking myself, well, what would happen on c5? Because it looks like maybe black could alleviate some pressure by trading queens, but the problem is after knight b5, knight d to b5, like if black were to trade queens here, I mean, you just look, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces developed. c7 is really weak and hard to hold. And also, I mean, white's going to be able to develop, like bishop c4 is nice. Castles, and he'll just like, he's just going to have complete development and free reign over so many squares. So even though this probably is like a little bit better only in the sense that black's king is still in the center, and with the queens off, at least probably is not going to get mated right away. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty bad. And so we see something pretty similar in the game. So I'll continue with that. In the game, the opponent just kicked the bishop first here, and he stayed on the sensitive diagonal here, and then he played c5. So knight e to b5, and we get something very similar here. So okay, hitting the queen. And again, the computer does say that trading queens is better here, probably just because it's a little bit safer. But you're talking about a difference like, I mean, it's actually quite a bit different, but the valuation's like between 4 and 5, so either way you cut it, it's kind of lost. So I guess probably, practically speaking, black's best chance is to try to stir up trouble in some way if you can. It's just hard to do it when you don't have any pieces developed. Plus, again, the kind of person who plays a queen f6 on that move 2 is probably not going to want to trade the queens. But for whatever reason, you know, whether it was because he wanted to try to do something more complicated or whatever, he did keep the queens on the board. And okay, white just develops, and now he's got all four minor pieces developed to white's 0 minor pieces developed. Although black could develop a minor piece here on this turn. Instead, he plays another flank pawn move. And okay, as much as I like, obviously, I'm frustrated against the guy I'm talking about that I played against, who's playing this game as white. I do really love like seeing these flank pawn moves, like when people just play pawn moves during the opening, especially those when they're not developing. I really like to see them get punished, and I like to see how that's done so I can try to do it in my games. And here, our opponent just plays a really nice forceful combination to win the game immediately. If you want to pause the video and see if you can find it, go for it. Alright, so white's knight is under attack. He does have more development, so there might be some way to sacrifice it. Because, you know, usually if you have such a huge lead in development, losing one piece isn't going to matter if you can either checkmate or win some other greater material back. So along these lines, white sacrifices the knight and plays knight c7 check. Now, it's important to note that actually this sacrifice has to be taken because the king has no legal moves now that the bishop stayed on this diagonal. So, yeah, the knight has to be taken. And now, you might ask, well, what was the whole point of that? I mean, what has white gained by this? So again, if you want to put your video on pause and try to see the continuation, go ahead. Okay, so now white has the forcing continuation again with bishop takes f7 check. And again, the sacrifice has to be taken because black has no other legal moves. So I found it's kind of nice that both of these had to be taken. And now white actually has to play a little bit precisely. If he was to go ahead and hurry up and play queen h5 check immediately, then black could block this. So first, actually, he should play the check on d5. And, okay, I mean, the king can't go over to g6 because he gets mated with queen f5. So he's got to try to go back. So now he goes back here to the only available square, and now queen h5 check. And again, these moves are basically all forced. Black has to block, and now we see the whole point of deflecting the queen off of the 6th rank in the very first move, because now after queen takes, there's no queen defending this square, and black just got mated. So I thought that was a really nice way to finish the game, and just brute force destruction of this. Not only the early queen moves, because the queen was moved a few times, but if you look in this position where the tactical combination started, okay, black has moved the queen a few times now. I think he moved it 1, 2, 3 times, and he's also made 1, 2, 3, 4 pawn moves, and 2 of those pawn moves were flank moves. So I just really like, especially for black too, but I really like seeing how to punish those flank pawn moves, because I don't always do it correctly in my games, but I like to see examples of how I can do that, because supposedly in our opening chess principles, you're supposed to develop and not make too many pawn moves, not develop the queen too early. So again, that was the inspiration behind this series to begin with, was just to see some examples. And okay, I realized I probably won't see them in Continental Defense too often, but just kind of seeing patterns of how things get punished. Similar stuff can come up in the games, even if it's not the same position. You can see some similar themes. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you around.